Now, I want you to think about the last time you used your phone, and more from just text messaging capabilities, like when you actually called somebody on the phone. I grew up in an era that was kind of a hybrid. My generation, I'm Generation X. Um, I grew up in an era where you still had rotary phones, where my phone number started with the prefix was 968, so like 9 6 8. Oh God, it's just a pain. My grandparents had phones like that, this olive green rotary phone in their house, and I hated having to use it. But then you had like handheld cordless phones that was cool. Otherwise, you'd have like the phone wire wrapping around the kitchen or wherever else if you didn't have a cordless phone. So cordless phones became wow, that was the thing. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not tethered to this wall mounted phone or this jack mounted phone. Awesome, right? Okay. And then, of course, in the 90s, especially the late 90s, cell phones became in vogue. I remember the very first cell phone I ever had, or my family ever had, we bought like in 1993. And it came in a bag, and it had this very large battery that you had to plug in. And it was like one of those big, huge satellite phones. Doot, 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 doot. If you've ever seen Saved by the Bell and you saw Zach Morris with his cell phone, it was kind of like one of those things. And it's like, okay, this is kind of, all right, it's cutting edge, right? Yeah. Nowadays, you have an iPhone and like you can call in an airstrike with this thing. All right, this thing is amazing. The things that you could do. You can call over internet. I can talk to my sister who lives in London. All kinds of different things are capable now, but back then it was great. So my generation kind of bridged that gap from old to the current, where you really don't even have to talk to people anymore. You could just send them text messages, or nowadays you have voice over internet, or you have Zoom calls, or FaceTime. You can actually see the person that you're talking to. Who knows what's going to be developed in future years? I imagine as things continue to innovate, who's to say we're not going to have chips implanted in our heads and we're just going to be able to telepathically send messages? I have no idea. I would not be surprised. Technology is incredibly advanced, and nothing would surprise me anymore. So, but technology had to start somewhere. The laying of the transatlantic cable in the era of the 1860s or so connected North America with Europe. 10 years later, Alexander Graham Bell created the first telephone. And so, by using those transatlantic wires, you could actually make a telephone call and call overseas. But the telephone itself revolutionized the way that we communicated. So, by this era, in the late 1800s, the telegraph had already been invented. Okay, so Morse code, Samuel Morse had invented the Morse code, and you could send off messages like that. So to let the soldiers know, hey, the war is over, stop fighting 2 months after it's officially over, that sort of a thing. Okay, nowadays you can actually call someone and pick them up by telephone. Hello, can you come over at 4 o'clock for some tea and crackers, crumpets, something. I don't know. I don't know how that. My sister would probably tell you more about that. But otherwise, though, um, the telephone revolutionized the way that people communicated, and because you have the transatlantic wire, now that telegraph cable means that you can communicate elsewhere around the world from where you are. So that's great. So Alexander Graham Bell invented that. You have an Italian man, Guglielmo Marconi, who invented what would become the radio. Now, that was eventually brought to the United States and we expanded it from there. So, credit Marconi for the radio. My favorite sports radio station in Dallas, 96.7 and 1310 AM, The Ticket. They are very popular in the Dallas area, but they are very proud how they've won 3 Marconi Awards. Well, that award is named after basically the dude who invented the radio. He was an Italian guy brought to the United States, and we basically expanded it from there. Okay. Otherwise, though, Alexander Graham Bell, American, invented the telephone. Remember that. And that changed the world. That changed the way we communicate. Then, of course, a few years later, you have outdoor lighted lamps that can now illuminate the evenings without the use of gas lights. Okay? Shortly thereafter that, Thomas Edison, even though he did have some help, is largely credited with creating what we know today as an incandescent light bulb. Nowadays, you have LEDs that can last for years. They don't take much energy. You've got, what were those curly Q ones? Those, not halogen, but the ones that if you drop, they'd have all this toxin or so, whatever. I don't know. They're supposed to last longer, be more efficient. Just use LEDs. They're a lot more efficient now. The prices have gone down. They're pretty good. But back in the day, the incandescent light bulb was the advent. Nowadays, you can regulate electric current, whether on DC or AC, and you could send currents all throughout a house, and this incandescent light bulb can tap into that current and illuminate. So I've got a light right up there on my ceiling. Wow, those are light bulbs up there. That's pretty cool. Thank you, Thomas Edison. Now I don't have to stumble around my house while my kids have these random toys and Legos thrown everywhere, and I don't have to step on things and step on a Lego in the middle of the night because I need to go to the bathroom. Thank you, Thomas Edison, for illuminating my light and saving my feet. Yes. Okay. So you have some opportunity now because you have light bulbs, but I mentioned electric current. Nowadays, you have harnessed electric power. The United States and American innovation helped to harness electricity and electric currents so that it can be implemented in various different buildings and things that we utilize on a daily basis. And while you're at it, yes, Thomas Edison was largely credited for that. His understudy, Nikola Tesla, so if you see those Tesla cars driving around the road, that's named after him, okay? Nikola Tesla was actually an understudy of Thomas Edison, and they would eventually kind of come to odds against each other because one of them believed in AC current, the other one believed more in DC current. They both kind of split ways, but they made their own names. But nonetheless, electricity and the electric currents and the harnessing thereof now become commonplace. So oftentimes in American history, Benjamin Franklin, back in our Revolutionary era days, is credited with discovering electricity. Not really. He did put up a light bulb with a key in it, and it was struck by lightning, and he recognized there's a possible electric current there that can be harnessed for something. That was a somewhat revolutionary idea, and he was largely credited with that. Whether it was actually him who discovered it or not, that's up for debate. I don't personally think so, but pretty cool that an American was associated with that, especially because it's Ben Franklin. He's my favorite founding father. Extra point credit opportunity. Remember that? Otherwise, though, you have the electricity. America, baby. It's what we do. You're welcome. Okay. Nowadays, you have things like lithium-ion batteries. You have generators. You've got hydrogen power. All kinds of different things that can start up electricity. But nonetheless, electricity. And because now you have electric power, nowadays all those rail cars that drive around in cities, now they don't have to be steam powered. Now they can run on an electric rail all across. Nowadays you can start to build an underground railroad, a subway. No way. If you've ever been to downtown Dallas or uptown, you have that Uptown Express, that little shuttle. Or you also have DART. If you've ever ridden DART, that is electric rail. Okay? So, yeah, you're taking the red line from downtown to Mockingbird Station. Okay, yeah, you've got the red line. Okay, that's electric rail. That makes it all possible. But what else is possible? There are all kinds of buildings and homes in between those areas, right? Ah, all those buildings can now be fitted with electricity. No way. You mean that I can actually light up things in my house now? Wow. Electricity is going to change the world. Okay? These are very big nuances that make things very possible. Now, also, you have high speed freighters too. Um, you have more efficient steam engines that can operate on other different things, electricity, or harness electricity in different ways to where now you can carry more stuff in bigger freight trains and you can send them to further distances. So it's more efficient and you can carry more of it. That's going to change the way that people transport stuff and make it a lot cheaper. And by transporting stuff, I mean possibly transporting things like food, wheat. You have the advent of refrigerated boxcars around this time. You know what that means? You can transport meat overseas. What else? Whoa. Things are changing, and it's because of American innovation that improvements are now being made. So that is a massively huge deal. I mentioned buildings a little bit ago. Buildings, like a house, you got a one-story house, maybe a two-story house. What if you have a lot of people that live in a small contained area? You got to grow out, right? What if you don't have room to grow out? What, are people just going to stand right next to each other all day long? Well, that kind of happens in world history sometimes. But what if you utilize a technological advent and grow upwards? I wonder what can help us do that. What if we made buildings out of steel and use steel as the infrastructure, as the skeleton, really, to keep this building together? And it's very stable and it's strong and it can withstand a lot of punishment and keep on ticking, no problem at all. We can build tall buildings out of steel. If only we knew how to make it more pure and fast processed and abundant. Okay. Enter Henry Bessemer, who is actually an Englishman, and his American sidekick William Kelly co-developed the Bessemer process, which is basically a way of removing impurities from iron ore and injecting it with a few other different things to strengthen it to make a broad-based and strengthened steel. So the Bessemer process, steel and metalworks had been around for hundreds and thousands of years, but it was the Bessemer process that now made steel ready for larger scale production that now you can use to build large buildings that can house a lot of people for either residences or for offices. You look at all the skyscrapers in downtown Dallas, people aren't living in those. Maybe a couple of them are residential, but most of those are for jobs. You have a lot of law offices and banks and accounting firms, all kinds of different folks in those things. Okay? Those are skyscrapers. Now you can produce, you can grow up. Okay? You have now a process of doing that. So guess what? You're now going to start a boom where you're going to build a lot of buildings so a lot of people can have different ways to work. Okay. So now you're going to build an entire industry because in western Pennsylvania, you have quite a lot of iron ore that you can use and run through the Bessemer process and now mass produce steel. So steel would become a massive, massive industry in the United States. But it was a combination of Henry Bessemer and the American William Kelly, who co-invented that. Okay, but it was American ingenuity that started to mass produce it because of raw materials that were found in western Pennsylvania and in that region. Thank you, America. Okay, so from that standpoint, nowadays you have steel to build more railroads. Railroad tracks are made out of steel. So you have an abundance of tracks across the United States. Now you can make even more and more of them. You can make steel boxcars more so that way. And in doing so, while uncovering iron ore in western Pennsylvania, you've discovered there's this petroleum out there. This petroleum can be used and refined to lubricate these mechanical parts. It can be used to light various different things under gas lighting and whatnot. And if we burn it at different temperatures, it can be used for other things as well. Hold that thought. Okay? But otherwise, though, American innovation is really starting to take over the world because of electricity, because of telephones, because of steel and how it's mass produced. If you want to talk about some major world contributions, you got to look in your own home first.